Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to my review of Rising of the Shield Hero Season 2, Episode 10. Honestly, going into this episode, I was very excited to watch it after we got that cliffhanger in last week's episode of seeing Raphtalia being sent to this snowy prison. I was actually kind of excited because of the fact that I have only read the manga. I've never seen anything of the light novel. So going into this episode, I was like, alright, this is brand new content. This is stuff that we didn't get to cover in the manga in its full extent. Because in the manga, by the time we actually check in with Raphtalia and Lark's gang, they're already on the run after breaking out of this prison. So I was actually excited to get to see this brand new content. Then, after watching the episode, I ended up walking away from it feeling the same way about this week's episode that I did about the first 6. Where ultimately, I kind of felt that the changes they made, and again, to his credit, from what I understand from the comment section I saw on Verve, this adaptation of the anime's episode was actually a lot closer to the light novel than the manga was. So to give it credit, it's actually going back to the source material. But I felt like the way that they handled the episode and the pacing and the changes, at least as a manga fan, the changes that I know they made, I kind of felt like they were a little out of place at first. But by the end of the episode, I actually kind of felt the same way I did when it came to episode 6, where even though I didn't agree initially with the changes made in the first 5, by the time we got to the ending of episode 6, I felt like the changes that they made were actually there to heighten the payoff for episode 6. And same thing happened in this episode, even though I didn't initially like the changes they were making in the beginning of the episode and the journey that Raphtalia went on to get to the ending. By the time we got to the ending and we got the scene where we get to see Raphtalia reunite with Naofumi, Philo, and Rishia, it actually ended up feeling like a very emotional and rewarding moment. And I kind of feel like that if we didn't get the episode played out the way it did with Raphtalia's journey, then we wouldn't have got the same kind of feeling from it. Although I do kind of feel like we really didn't need that scene of Raphtalia being pretty much naked with only her sword covering her body in order to show her changing into her classic costume that's associated with this arc. But I understand why they did it. I mean, Raphtalia is, like I've been saying for a while now, she's the poster girl. So obviously, because of the fact that she's a poster girl and, well, as my professors in college would say, sex sells, it makes sense that they would actually want to show her in like an etchy shot here and there in order to kind of boost the sales or the the viewership for the younger audience, or the younger male audience at least. Now, as you guys already know, the crux of this week's episode is that after Raphtalia gets sent to that snowy prison area, she actually ends up meeting with Lark and his gang and uses her illusion magic to help them all escape. And then after they actually go on a run and try to make their way over to the country that Naofumi got teleported to in the last week's episode, they actually end up coming across the ceremony that's being held for the guy that actually caught her in episode 8. And he's basically here trying to gain control over the katana vessel weapon, which is basically kind of the same thing like what Naofumi has, more actually in line with what Lark has, because it's actually a weapon that, instead of being chosen when you're summoned to the world, it actually chooses its own wielder. And in this episode, instead of going with the purple-haired guy, it actually chooses to go along with Raphtalia. And that's the reason why in the last week's episode, near the end of it, we saw Raphtalia's slave mark disappear and no longer be a member of Naofumi's party, because as soon as the vessel weapon chose her, it immediately erased her slave mark. And then for some reason, after Raphtalia actually ends up gaining the vessel weapon, she decides to go on the run by herself, most likely because she kind of doesn't want to put Lark and his gang in the spotlight or in trouble, and basically wants to take on all the danger by herself. And when she ends up running, or as she's running actually, the vessel weapon actually is slowly making her body age back to her normal self, which ends up happening just in time for us to get that nude scene that I already mentioned of her changing into her classic costume for this arc. But after she actually changes, she decides to use the vessel weapon to fight against the purple-haired guy, and pretty much easily defeats him and his cronies. And then he sends some basically clones of this world's great spiritual beast, kind of like how the spirit turtle was the spirit beast of the world that Naofumi comes from. This world's great spirit beast is actually the legendary white tiger, which I believe his name is pronounced Byaku. I never actually been good at pronouncing names, so forgive me if I actually am butchering this name. But anyway, after she defeats them and the purple-haired guy again, she walks away and then realizes that she pretty much used up all her energy. And this is actually when she goes face to face with a more powerful version of one of the clones. And just as she gives up and is ready to accept death, this is when she gets saved by Naofumi, Kizuna, and Philo. And we kind of end up getting this kind of very sweet but kind of awkward scene between Raphtalia and Naofumi, because throughout the entire episode, we have Raphtalia pretty much thinking that once her and Naofumi end up meeting up again, he's going to be upset with her for basically denying his orders and staying behind, even though she really didn't have a choice in that matter. And then once Raphtalia actually gets found by Naofumi, he thinks that now that she's free from her slave mark, she no longer has to follow his orders, so she's probably going to choose to go off on her own journey instead of sticking around him. Which was kind of weird to see him thinking like that in this episode, even though we already saw in the last season that even when she was freed from her slave mark and had the choice to go wherever she wanted, she still chose to become a slave again and stick around him. So you would think that Naofumi wouldn't have these kind of thoughts anymore, but I can understand why he has this kind of mindset with how much he's been betrayed throughout his entire life since coming to this world. But anyway, after the two of them kind of realize that neither one of them is going to abandon the other or be mad at the other, we get this really sweet moment of the two of them basically embracing and basically reuniting finally. And that's pretty much where the episode ends, with everyone basically back together, except for the fact that we don't have Clark, Glass, and Teresa here in the moment. But the three of them probably aren't far behind, and in the manga, this is when the two groups actually met up and decided to go to Kizuna's house, and this is when she actually got the full details about what's been happening over the time she's been trapped in the labyrinth, about how Lark and his gang went over to Naofumi's world and tried to basically kill him and the other heroes in order to save their world from being destroyed, and she pretty much ends up forcing both groups to extending their peace treaty indefinitely, at least until they can actually find a way to save both worlds without having to kill each other's heroes. But anyway guys, that's pretty much all that happened in this week's episode. Now when it comes to Raphtalia getting the Vassal weapon, like I already mentioned earlier in the review, I believe the difference between her weapon and the shield and the spear weapon that, the cardinal heroes have, basically is that the cardinal heroes are summoned to the world and they get assigned that weapon, while when it comes to the vassal weapons, they actually get to choose who their wielders are. Now, if anyone out there who's actually read the light novel has a better explanation of exactly how these weapons work and what's the differences between them, please let me know in the comment section down below, because I'd love to know it. Because up to the point where I'm at in the manga, they still haven't explained exactly what the differences are between the two weapons, besides the fact that the vassal weapons choose their wielder versus the cardinal heroes having to be summoned to the world. Oh, and when it comes to Raphtalia's slave mark, I guess she's not going to be able to get it put back on her now that she's the wielder of the katana weapon. Again, I haven't gotten too much further ahead of where we are currently in the anime and the manga, so I don't know exactly if at some point when they go back to their original world, if Raphtalia actually does end up getting the slave mark put back on her, and if it actually gets to stay or not. I assume because of the fact that the vassal weapon actually got rid of it initially, that now that she's the wielder of it, she can no longer be made into a slave. But we'll probably end up finding that out later on. Anyway guys, that's pretty much it for this episode. As far as we're aware, there's only 3 more left. I'm hoping that instead of basically just being 13 episodes for this season, they're doing a first and second core, where we'll end up getting another 13 episodes in like a few months. But as of right now, we only have 3 episodes left for the season, and I'm looking forward to seeing exactly what happens in those last 3 episodes. But that's it for the video guys, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you all in the next one. Peace.